Good evening and welcome to a very special election night, KTAL News Now. The polls are closed and it is time to get into the vote count and the analysis. I'm joined by our friends, Stephen Parr and Theron Jackson. They're gonna help me break down the numbers. We're gonna talk about voter registration and how that may impact it, who registered, who we anticipate will vote. We'll talk about the 4th and the 6th congressional district races for the House of Representatives. And we'll talk about some local election matters that matter to you all. So without any further ado, let me introduce my guests, Stephen and Theron. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here. So let's get right into it. The Secretary of State, Nancy Landry, spoke with us yesterday, and she was saying that she anticipates 1 million, maybe even 1.2 million people to vote today, in addition to the 900,000 people that have already early voted. What do you all think of that? And over time in Louisiana, is this going to be looking like historically high voter turnout? What do you all say?
I think those numbers are plausible, certainly possible for what we're looking at with some of the early voting numbers. It's not necessarily a matter of whether it's a record for all of the state of Louisiana. What I think we are seeing is a big change in who's coming out. That's certainly what we saw in the early voting. Normally, Democrats outvote Republicans in the early vote by about a 4-to-3 ratio. And this time you flip it. Republicans this time showed up at about a 4-to-3 ratio to Democrats, so about 43% to the Democrats, 36% or somewhere in there. That number is normally the other way around. The big question, and I think it's one we won't know until the end of the night, were those Republican votes simply replacing election day voters who just moved up because Donald Trump told them to move up, or is there actually just a change in the way people in Louisiana are voting, and the state's becoming even more red than it already is? Or is it a combination of the two? And do Democrat voters who didn't show up for early voting, do they show up today simply because they saw what was out and they got more organized and decided to get involved today?
And that was my concern. I think we have to kind of wait until the numbers come out, because there's several different dynamics that you just mentioned. Because you think that there'd be a more robust turnout and concern about statewide elections than there would be for national elections, if you will. And so that's all we really have on the ballot. Not a lot of even major cities with local races, right? And so I think it's going to be interesting because it is a national race. I think you may have seen early voting. Somebody asked a question last week, why do you think so many people voted early? When you look at the numbers, so you said 10 days. I think what it really proves is that if you give people more access, then you'll have more participation. And I think that's really more of what it is than just, whether it's election day or early voting. So we went from 7 days to the first time now to 10 days. And so people have a lot of chance, and I think it's becoming more in vogue to vote early, and people are now ginning up their base and people who they're concerned about. Go vote now. You got 10 days, go vote, go vote. So I think that's one of the bigger deals that I'd like to see when this is over. We'll kind of see if it's replacement vote. I'm really interested in, we talked about the young people who registered.
Absolutely.
There's a large degree of jump in, because that's what interests me, because those are people really making decisions about where to land. Because growth in the Republican Party, I think, is two things. Number one, it's just Democrats who are moving or changing party, not new people moving to the state per se. And because we started now going to closed primaries, people now have to make up their mind in a different way, right? So you see this exodus, because before in jungle primaries, you just had to go to the restaurant voters office. I've been a Democrat all my life, but I vote for Reagan, and I've been voting Republican forever. But now you kind of got to pick a side because of these closed primaries. So I think you'll see the numbers start to settle more in because of those kind of things.
And when we look at the numbers, one number that jumped out to me was the 21 to 34-year-olds. There have been two demographics that people have talked about throughout this presidential primary, right? They talked about young voters, but particularly young women and young men breaking down young black men, young white men, which way will they vote? As you see this 648,000, I was really shocked that that many people between 21 and 34 even registered or cared enough to fill out the form, right? So what do you all think is driving that? Is this issues? Is this just good footwork and good ground teams that are registering people? What do you think are driving these younger voter numbers?
But one of the things I see is that the culture is different. We are largely now steeped in a social media celebrity culture, right? And so I think the more you see the Taylor Swift endorsements and people like that, you start to get more people coming into the process, at least registering and hopefully voting, which I think is a good thing. But I also think that while it's not just young people, I think quite frankly it's the whole country. We're finding a narrow repertoire of issues these days, and people are more and more. I think this presidential election tonight could prove to be a model for that. That people have become single issue voters. That they can put out of 100 issues, they can put 99 on the shelf because of the one issue that becomes their single issue. And I don't want to say the danger, but one of the things that concerns me about that is if you do enough polling, that you can find that single issue, and we'll find candidates who can really articulate and fire people up over that single issue when it takes more than a single issue to run the country and to be effective as a leader. So I go back to the young adults. I think they are very often brought into the fray by single issues, and nowadays by celebrities who have a single issue, and they're drawing them in too. So that could be it. No data. I'm not quoting any data to try to suggest that, but I think just the cultural feel is what I'm getting from that.
I do think that there's a bit of a mindset shift with the current younger generation, in that they do feel they need to be more involved, they do feel they need to be more engaged. And maybe some of that is because of the rancor of the times. It's hard to go on social media without seeing somebody talking about politics.
Right.
Whether you want to see that or not, it's hard to not see it. And so that may be part of it. The other part is that I think there is an angst amongst millennials and younger, Gen Z in particular, over some key issues for them. I think for a certain set of voters, abortion is a big issue for them. I think for another set of voters, the whole idea of being able to afford to buy a house, that seems daunting to a lot of younger voters, more so than perhaps any other generation in American history. And I think folks are looking at, okay, interest rates went up, now I can't afford a house that I've been saving for, maybe I need to get involved politically. I'm not sure it's any one single issue, because people are individuals, and we have diverse reasons for doing what we do. But I do think you see a groundswell of a variety of issues that can, as you're talking about single issue things, you're seeing a groundswell of specific single issue things that are getting people very, very motivated, especially in the younger generation, it seems.
Absolutely. And they don't see themselves much. I mean, this group, unlike I think perhaps any group before, see themselves more entrepreneurially than they do as people seeking employment, quite frankly. And so I think when you start talking about economics and the economy and money in general, that and I think, in my opinion, the pandemic helped to exacerbate that and to accelerate perhaps that among younger people, because people took to social media and had nothing else to do with it. I started realizing I could sell this, I could do that.
Right.
And so they're making, not to mention the kind of money they're making because of the number of followers that they're monetizing their own presence, and the kind of markets that didn't exist 40 years ago, that only broadcast media and large people took advantage of. Now you've got all of these different spaces in social media and whatnot where you can have micro media, right? And people are monetizing that. So I think these young people have a different mindset, as Stephen was saying, but a lot of it is driven by resources, economics.
Absolutely, I would definitely agree with that. Let's get into the congressional races, right? Because there's the top of the ticket, and then there's the top of the ticket, and we have two seats in the House of Representatives that's available. Well, maybe one is available. The other one is pretty much a lock, right? Speaker Mike Johnson did meet a challenger in his race. what do you all think of the fourth congressional district? Is this a challenging race for Mike Johnson? Is he about to walk through it pretty similarly to what he did when he ran unopposed? What does the night look like for the speaker?
I think the only question is whether he ends up over 85% or under 85%. He's going to walk away with this one. And there are a couple things going in his favor. One, he is well known in the area. He's now his fifth term in Congress. There's a lot of power to incumbency. But he is also the first Speaker of the House from the state of Louisiana, which gives him tremendous clout. And it gives the state of Louisiana tremendous clout. I mean, you've got Mike Johnson, Steve Scalise, the number one and number two person in the House of Representatives. Louisiana's never had anyone in federal government as high as Mike Johnson is right now. And so especially when you're looking at the fact that the person running against him is also a Republican, not a Democrat, so there's not a motivation to bring the opposition party out. But it's also a Republican who's never run for office before and nobody knows. So he might as well not have had an opponent. This was a steamroller night. And again, the only question for CD4 is he over 85 or under 85? And in the end, it doesn't really matter. He's going back to Washington.
I think it's an issue of margin. You know, somebody talked about this matter. What's the margin going to be? Is it going to be 85%? Whatever the case is, I think the larger concern for him was not his race. I think the larger concern for him was, you know, to some extent the presidential race, but more to a greater extent the House.
Right.
We don't know before the night is over what the House will look like, and his speakership could be short lived if the numbers and turnout in all these places, because a lot of times getting this top of the ticket and it's the close races and the driving turnout in a lot of little places that we don't know much about. Coattail victories can happen for folks in different places, and so that's going to be another interesting thing. And I think he had the slimmest margin that you could possibly have now. One vote, and not to mention kind of a divided
Within his party.
within his own party.
Right.
So he's done, quite frankly, an incredible job to remain the speaker for as long as he had. But it's going to be interesting what the night holds, because if you don't need many, and the House races, there's so many of them. Anything could happen. You know, California, New York delivered the Republican majority, and 2 years later they could take it back. So you just don't know.
Well, and Louisiana could take it back.
And Louisiana could take it
Because
back.
of CD6,
That's right.
it's almost, it's very likely that CD6
Guaranteed. Yeah.
is going to go to a flip. And if the House is down to one vote again, that could be the vote that determines whether Mike Johnson's Speaker of the House next year or not.
Right. That's going to be interesting to see tonight.
It's very interesting because when we think about Louisiana politics, power is not one of the words that comes up very often, right? But here we are, we have Mike Johnson, Steve Scalise, this very important 6th congressional district. What does this mean for the future of Louisianans? What should we look forward to as residents, as voters, in this power structure that is building in Washington, D.C. related to our state?
Depends upon who wins the House. If the Democrats win the House and Hakeem Jeffries becomes Speaker in January, Mike Johnson, having been the Speaker of the House, doesn't really mean much. Steve Scalise being the number 2 guy in the Republican Party means almost nothing, especially if Kamala Harris wins the White House. So those things go away, and Troy Carter actually becomes more influential in Congress at that point, simply because he's a Democrat in the Democrat Party if they were to take the House. So Troy Carter in New Orleans would become more powerful in the House than Mike Johnson or Steve Scalise, or frankly Mike Johnson and Steve Scalise combined, simply because it's a numbers game.
Yeah. And if District 6, if Cleo Fields were to win, it'd be interesting, you know, go back to the turn of power, because Cleo Fields will go back to D.C. With the same level of seniority that you leave with. It's unique about Congress. You go back with the same level of seniority he leaves with. So technically, he and Troy Carter will be at the same level. Hakeem Jeffries, if he's the Speaker of the House, we have now 2 gentlemen from Louisiana who, kind of like when we have Mike and Steve, the issue for me is having one person. This guy, Fields, does represent some Shreveport as well, so that's important, because I didn't understand, and you may know a little bit more about this, Steve, but Mike, as the Speaker of the House, I understand has limitations about being able to directly say, I'm gonna appropriate something to my district and those kind of things, because he's the Speaker of the House. And that's one of the things you kind of stay away from, which doesn't, you don't lose influence, obviously. Just find another way to do it. And I don't know how much Steve or anybody else, because we here in North Louisiana, we're always isolated to just one guy. And I'm sure he works well with the rest of the team, but I mean, they're overrepresented in South Louisiana, it feels like. And with just him, now, I don't know what that would look like, because, again, if he remains Speaker, then he still has that influence. You just got to find some people to work with him, and maybe he can, I think Cleo feels, or whoever will win this seat, is savvy enough to be able to understand that I'm from Louisiana, the Speaker's from Louisiana, we can make this work out, right? So that would be my hope as well.
And there's a big question about whether CD6 survives anyway. The Supreme Court announced this last week they're going to take up the case about our congressional district and the allegations of gerrymandering there. And the previous case that actually led to the Republican legislature in the state of Louisiana to even draw CD6 in the first place. So the Supreme Court's combining those two cases. They're going to hear it in January, and they may rule that that district was not constitutional and the previous districts weren't constitutional. You have to go back to the drawing board and try again. And the whole thing, we be doing this again 2 years from now with completely different boundaries.
Right. Obviously possible, yes.
Before we wrap up tonight, are there any races locally? I know that there are a couple seats in Houghton, or there's a Benton, the Mayor Benton is up for either re-election, or the seat is up for election, I'm sorry. Are there any local races that you all have your eye on, that there may be a sleeper, something that we don't anticipate, or do we just think what will happen locally will happen?
There are several, local races. You got mayor for Oil City, mayor for Odessa, chief of police for Houston. I really think the big issue though is the presidential. That's where everybody's eyes are tonight. Who's going to win this presidential race? Because for the third election in a row, you have Donald Trump running. For the third election in a row, it's a tight race, and no one is for sure heading into election night who's going to win. I think back in 2008, 2012, I'm pretty sure everybody knew Barack Obama was going to win that election heading in, and since then these have been nail biters. And then you add into the fact that we've got the House of Representatives, which was at one point just one vote, is 3 or 4 right now, and that could flip. The Senate likely is flipping at this point, since Republicans already picked up a seat there. I think the national attention is just dominating. Unless you're in Baton Rouge, where they're looking at mayor, I think everybody's attention's on the national story.
Yeah, I agree. I think everybody's hyper-focused, and I also think, unfortunately, we may not know tonight, right? Because a few places, unless there's going to be a landslide of some kind, we probably won't know until the next couple of days. And so I think we're going to be marinating over this presidential race for a few more days, I think. But I think at least tonight people can kind of get a sense of the direction. But whether or not anybody gets to 270, gets to a predictable 270, it's going to be a while before we know that, I think.
We got star power at the top of the ticket, so it's a hard thing to overcome, right?
And Stephen said it, Donald Trump has been the Republican representative for 3 races in a row, and he's never run against the same person, right? And the Democrats, but there have been different people running each time, a woman, a man, and a woman, So I think it'll be interesting to see how these dynamics play out, because after 3 times, it's clear he knows where his folks are, but there's still some different dynamics. I mean, Joe Biden 4 years ago was just incredible. I mean, it was, I think it was, Joe Biden benefited from anti-Trump sentiment at that particular time during COVID, and now this is the first race since we've now, I think, recalibrated as a country back out of COVID to kind of see what people are.
Stephen Parr, Theron Jackson, thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining me tonight. I know that you all have to get ready to go and talk to Alex, go over to the big desk, and talk about these races one more time for the people. Thanks again for joining me. Like they said, it may be a very long night. We may be waiting until Friday to get to 270. Who knows? Take a deep breath and sleep well tonight, because we won't know much about any of these races anytime soon. Thanks again for watching. I'm your host, Marlo Lason, and this is KTAL News Now.